Hello, everyone. So what I thought I'll do is I will record the most important calculations that are required for the M&T unit. I have spoken about this briefly, but and this is considered strongly as prerequisite before entering the unit. But I have seen that several students are still struggling with these M&T calculations that you are going to be using very frequently, day in and day out, as dietitians, not just for your exams, assignments, and for this unit, but even in real life practice. So I have, therefore, I have drafted certain examples of the key calculations that will help you out throughout this unit and then beyond. All right, so the first one which I'll start is with dietary calculations and a few examples of how do you approach them. Now, when I give you examples of these dietary calculations, please know that this is not the only standard golden method of doing it, but I'm considering two resources from an exam point of view that you're allowed to carry when it comes to dietary calculations. One is handbook. You are always allowed to carry your handbook for your assessments. And the second document for in respect to calculations, dietary calculations that will help you out is the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. So what I have done is I have updated the document that you can carry in your assignments and exams in terms of Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. This is a two-pager document. This document will tell you how many serves are required of the core food groups for men and women for various ages. This also gives you what does a standard serve indicate. Very, very important, right? Because this will help you to then quantify when you have a dietary recall of a patient in front of you and then you have to compute the nutrients out of it. So this document will be helpful for you because it not only has the recommended serves for specific age group for men and women, but it also gives you the example serves of what is an example serve of various items for each of the food groups. All right, so you will be allowed to carry this document for your assessments, and this will be a handy document for your dietary calculation. And the second page of this document will also have what is a serve of discretionary food. All right, so this is also important so that this gives you example again of what are the various discretionary foods and what does a serve look like, how many kilojoules is roughly a serve, and you have this everywhere, how many kilojoules is roughly a serve. So this document will help you with your calculations, dietary calculations, and the handbook, which has the food composition ready reckoner tables. Those will definitely help you with your calculations. All right. So these are the two documents that are going to be very handy for you from a dietary calculation perspective. Okay, so now what I have done is, as you have seen, the calculations which I have shown, they are handwritten. They are not typed on the PowerPoint presentation. Why? Because maths is always easier to explain when you are doing it by hand rather than typing it. That may not make 100% sense. So that is why everything is handwritten over here and then it is pasted on this PowerPoint. So I hope it is okay. By doing this, I just wanted to make it as simple and easy as possible. So now I will go through a few examples. And as I said, there is no one gold standard way for the dietary calculation. When you're out there in the placement, you can refer to things such as the Fazan's website, Calorie King, which will make your calculations much more faster and easier. But now in the exams, when you're restricted to the handbook and to the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating, the approved document that you have, in this context, these are a few examples that will help you out. All right, so now let's say that the patient is having 3/4 cup of porridge. All right, so the dietary recall intake says that the patient is having 3/4 cup of porridge. So now, how do you calculate the kilojoules out of it? Okay, so your Australian Guides to Healthy Eating, which is this one over here, the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. When you look at the grains domain over here, all right, and when you look at the cooked porridge, it says that half a cup of cooked porridge, which is 120 gram, is roughly 1 serve. Okay, so this is where I'm getting the information from. So when I say AGHG as a reference over here, this means whatever I have taken over here is from the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. So I hope it makes sense and you can connect the dots. All right, so yes, it says, so our AGHG says that half cup of porridge is roughly 120 grams. Okay, half cup of porridge, when you convert this fraction into decimal, what does it look like? It looks like 0.5 cup. Okay, so half a cup is 0.5 cup, which is 120 grams. This information I have got from the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. This is the reference which I would put if I was taking the exam. So 3/4. So when you convert 3/4 into decimal, what does it look like? 0.75 cup. Okay, so it's as simple as that. All right, so 3/4 cup is 0.75 cup. How many grams would that be? Okay, and now you cross multiply. What does cross multiplication mean? It means you have 120 into 0.75. So do you see they are opposite each other? A lot of students are struggling with the concept of cross multiplication. So if you are very well versed with it, please be patient with this recording, because this recording is meant for everybody in the cohort, and we need to be patient and mindful about everybody has an own and individual learning curve. All right. So why do I call this cross multiplication, or why is it called as cross multiplication? Because you are crossing the borders. This is 120 into 0.75. So do you see they are opposite each other? When you multiply them, this is called as cross multiplication. Okay, and then this is divided by 0.5. So whatever is remaining on the other side is your X, okay, or your question mark over here. All right, so 0.75 you have into 120 divided by 0.5. How much is that? That is 180 grams. So your 3/4 cup of porridge is roughly 180 grams. Okay, so now do you understand how did I come to this 180 grams? So I had this half cup of porridge from the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. The Australian Guides to Healthy Eating converted this half cup for me into grams, which is 120 grams. From this, I could extract the information. What does 3/4 cup of porridge look like? Okay. So now I have these 180 gram of porridge. Once you have information in grams, calculation becomes very, very easy. The biggest challenge with calculation is, in dietary calculation, is when you have to take household portion sizes like cups and teaspoons and things like that, and glasses and tubs and all of those kind of figures, and you have to convert them into gram. That is the biggest challenge. Once you have gram, then things are pretty straightforward. So now what do we do with this 180 gram? So over here, when you look at your handbook, in your handbook, you look at the quick ready, the ready reckoner which you have. In the ready reckoner, it says that cooked porridge 100 grams. So you have ready reckoner where everything is given in either 100 ml or 100 gram. That is the ready reckoner which I'm talking about in your handbook, okay? Where all information is in hundreds, be it ml or be it gram, okay? So 100 gram of porridge, your handbook says, is 276 kilojoules. We know that our gram is 180 gram. So what is 180 gram of porridge? How many kilojoules is that? It will definitely be a bigger number than 276, because 276 is only 100 grams of porridge. So now you have 276 into 180. Again, I'm cross multiplying. I'm crossing the borders, divided by 100. Okay. This will give me 497 kilojoules. Okay. So roughly this is the kilojoules for, say, 3/4 cup of porridge or 180 grams of porridge. Okay. So to summarize this, I use the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating to convert the household portion sizes, which is cup, into grams. Then I looked at the handbook to take the grams and then to find out the kilojoules for these grams. When you don't have the exact food item, which is, I was lucky I had porridge. I think it says oats porridge in your handbook. So which was great. So I had this information, which is good. But if I don't have the exact same food item, Go back to your nutrition 101, which you learned in your year 2. What was the principle that was taught to you? You were taught that go to the closest possible option. So guys, all of these calculations you have covered directly or indirectly in your year 2 units. And now we are applying this into medical nutrition therapy, which is why this is called as a prerequisite for this unit. But again, happy to go through this, and I hope this gave you some idea as to how do you approach your dietary calculation. Let's look at the other example. Now we have the patient, for example, he's having, you have half a, say, tub of yogurt you have, all right? And this is a fruit type yogurt that the patient is having. Okay, you have half a tub or half a cup of yogurt, which is written. Now, again, go back to Australian Guides to Healthy Eating, because your Australian Guides to Healthy Eating is the document which tells you what does the household portion size look in grams, okay? That conversion for you is done by the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. So now when I look at the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating, it tells me that 3/4 cup of yogurt is roughly 200 grams, okay? So now, again, you know what is 3/4 in decimals? It is 0.75. So the AGHG is telling me 0.75 cup of yogurt is 200 grams. I want to know for half a cup of yogurt, which is 0.5 cup of yogurt. How many grams is that? Again, cross multiply, grow across the border, which is 0.5 into 200 divided by 0.75. Okay, this will give you 133.3 grams. Okay. So now you use this information with your handbook. Okay, so once you have the grams, handbook becomes very easy, because in handbooks, almost everything for you is given in terms of 100 grams or 100 ml. Okay, so now when I go to your handbook, I have this per 100 gram. It is the information which I have is for strawberry yogurt. So when you look at the dairy section in your handbook for 100 grams, 100 ml, over there it says 100 gram of strawberry yogurt or 100 ml of strawberry yogurt will give you 417 kilojoules. Okay, so this is what your handbook tells you. Now you know you have 133 grams of yogurt. How many kilojoules is that? Again, cross the border, and it is 133 into 417 divided by 100. This is roughly 556 kilojoules. Okay, so same principle I have applied. Household measurements converted to grams, which is a very handy document for that, Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. The second thing which I do is take that gram value, look at my handbook, and then convert the grams into kilojoules and to the closest possible option. Over here, the dietary recall just tells me it's a fruity type of yogurt. It does not tell me whether it is banana or berries or whatever. Okay, but look at the logic. Irrespective of the type of fruity yogurt, as long as it is not written that it is a low-fat yogurt or it is a fat-free yogurt, we have to assume this is a regular type of yogurt the person is having, and therefore this is the closest possible option that I have in my handbook, which is strawberry yogurt. Okay, so when you show this sort of background calculations in your exams, in your assignments, this gives a lot of confidence to the examiner that she knows and he or she has put a lot of thought, and they have put the right logic in coming to their derivations at the end. Okay, so now I'll take another sort of an example. Let's say the patient dietary recall is saying things in not in cups or in say glass or in say household measurements as such. It is telling you the patient is having half a serve of sponge cake. Okay, no, so now you'll be like, okay, this that's random, that you know how it's written half a serve of sponge cake. Now I need to calculate kilojoules from that. So how do I go about it? So the way I go about it is I look at the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating for the discretionary food. Over there, again, you will not find the exact same thing, which is sponge cake. But I know sponge cake over here means it is uniced. It is a simple plain cake. So I just look at Australian Guides to Healthy Eating for 1 serve of plain cake. Okay. AGHG tells me 1 serve of plain cake is 1 slice, which is roughly 40 grams. Okay. So I know that 1 slice, which is 40 grams, is 1 serve, So what is half a serve? It is half of all of these numbers, which is half a slice is 20 grams, which is your half serve. Okay. So I hope this is like logical and it makes sense. Now you have the golden number, which is things in grams. Okay. So now kilojoule finding becomes easier. So I know this is 20 grams. Okay. I go to the handbook. This is what I do because this makes my calculation precise. All right. I know some of you may say, oh, but we have the kilojoules over here. For example, for all of this, we have kilojoules over here. Yes, guys, you do have that. But wherever possible, if you have a more closer option, go to that closer option. So when you have these derivatives over here, these sort of derivatives, these are very broad. When you are out of any options, when there is no information nowhere in your handbook, then it is good to use these very, very broad derivatives. Okay. But when you have the option of choosing a food item from your handbook, which may be very closely associated with what the patient is eating, then please go to that source because that will give you more accurate estimation of the nutrient intake. Okay, so that is why I said there is no one gold standard of doing it. I try to do it in a way which is a little bit more closer to accuracy, okay, which gives me more accurate findings. All right. But yes, there is no one way of doing it. So yes, now we have 20 grams. We know that the patient had 20 grams of sponge cake. Okay. When I look at the handbook, again, there is no such thing as sponge cake over there specifically. But what I do see in the handbook is that for 100 grams, again, I'm looking at that 100 gram or 100 ml, that one ready reckoner, because I try to use and I try to prefer the 100 gram or 100 ml ready reckoner wherever possible. It's not possible in all situations, but wherever possible, because that gives me more accurate estimations of my calculation. Okay, so when I look at this 100 gram ready reckoner, it tells me that a cake, which is, say, maybe it's chocolate, it is uniced. So this the description is very, very close to sponge cake. Okay, so like this is like the closest option that I can find. All right. So yeah, that tells me that 100 gram gives you 1553 kilojoules. Okay, and I want to know that if my patient is having 20 grams, how much would that be? Again, I cross multiply. Okay, so 20 into 153 divided by 100. This gives me 311 kilojoules. All right, so over here, what is the principle that I used? I looked at the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. What was given to me was serving size. Serving size, as you know, AGHG is the best document for serving size. I converted that serving size into grams. Once you have grams, which is the golden numbers, you can take those grams and you can find the kilojoules from the handbook with the closest possible option. All right. So I hope, guys, this is you're following, and this is a little bit helpful for those who are struggling with the calculations. Now I'll show you one more example, which is, say you have half cup of orange juice. All right. So the patient is having half a cup of orange juice, and in your dietary recall, in the patient's dietary recall, someone has been kind enough to also say that it is 125 ml. This makes your life super duper easy because when you have things in grams and in ml, you can directly jump to your handbook. Okay. So when you look at the handbook and when you look at the 100 gram or 100 ml section for the fruits, okay. So under your fruit section for the 100 gram or 100 ml, you have written that 100 ml of orange juice, which is the commercial orange juice they have written, which is completely fine. This is like as close as it can get. Okay. So 100 ml of orange juice gives you 117 kilojoules. This I got from your handbook from that 100 gram, 100 ml section for the fruits, specifically for the fruits food group. Okay. Then I know that the patient is having 125 ml of orange juice. So how much would that be? So again, cross the borders, marry these two numbers, which is 125 into 117 divided by 100. Okay. So imagine this is like, means an Indian marrying an Australian. Okay. They are crossing the borders and they are marrying each other. Okay. So I can't make it more say simple than this, but sometimes even silly things like this can be can help you stick this information in your head for lifelong. Okay, so you're crossing the borders. Indian is marrying an Australian. All right, so 125 ml into 117 divided by 100. Okay, so what do you have? You have 146 kilojoules. Okay, so as you have seen, the hint over here is when I have something directly provided to me in mls or in grams, I prefer, my first option is there something in the handbook which is close to my food item? If there is, I will only use the handbook, because things have been provided to me in mls or in grams, and that makes my life easier. Okay, so this is another type of calculation which you could experience. All right, then you have I'll give you one more example over here, which is say half cup of custard. And half cup of custard, you're lucky over here again, because this was provided to you in the patient's dietary recall, which is half cup of custard is your 125 ml. Okay, this is what has been written to you, so you don't have to worry about that. So now what do? Is I go to my handbook. Now in handbook, if you see, there is nothing as custard written over there. Okay, so when I don't have, again, this was orange juice was such an ideal option. Like, it was exactly there and life was simple. But now I know that custard is not there in the handbook, but I know what is custard. It is a frozen dessert, or it is maybe it's not frozen, but it is a cold dessert. It is a sweet, it is a dessert item, it is served cold. What is closest to custard that I have in the handbook? Well, I have ice cream. Okay, so when you look under the dairy section for that per 100 gram or per 100 ml, when you look at your dairy section, you will find ice cream in your handbook. So that is what I have chosen, because that's the closest I can find to custard. Okay, so I directly jump to my handbook. Why? Because I have the numeric value over here in the patient's dietary recall, which is 125 ml of custard. Okay, so now what does the handbook say? The handbook says 100 ml of ice cream is 433 kilojoules. This is from your handbook under the dairy section. So now for me, 125 ml of custard, which is the closest thing to ice cream, is how many kilojoules? Again, you marry these two numbers, 125 into 433 divided by 100. So what do you have? You have 541 kilojoules. Okay. So now, over here, what is my key tip for you? That in this sort of calculation, I have used firstly the handbook only. Why? Because I have the numeric number which I need, which is in ml or in gram, which is provided to me, which makes my life simple. Okay. I did not have the exact option custard. I used the closest possible option, which was say a cold dessert option, which is suitable enough to use for custard. So these are the kind of assumptions. If I were you as a student, I would say put these sort of my rough calculations for the examiner to see, and these assumptions that I have made, so they know where I'm coming from and that my assumptions are logical. It's not that I've just randomly done something. I have a logic behind it. So basically, guys, with your nutrient calculation, it is very important to convince your examiner that you have a logical approach to it. So this is how I do the calculations. Okay, this is how I derive my numbers. And that is why I showed you my logic and my thinking process behind it. You may do the same thing a little bit differently. You may have values which are, say, 10 to 15 standard deviations higher or lower, depending upon the approach you take. But as long as you can clearly articulate and justify your approach to me, and I, as an examiner, or somebody else who's an examiner, if they feel, oh, yes, this makes sense, then you get a tick. Okay, but it has to be a logical approach. It can't just be anything haywire where we cannot make sense as a third person about what you have done. Okay, so you need logic behind it is basically very important. And I hope these sort of summary tips at the end helps you to understand, okay, what sort of logic I can apply when so and so sort of foods are presented to me. Now we take the final example. So you have in your patient's recall, it is only written that the patient had a ham and salad sandwich. I know these examples that I'm giving you of dietary recall over here, a patient's dietary recall, they are so vague and ambiguous, right? You would be irritated and you would be thinking, why can't she provide more information? Of course, as an examiner, I can provide a lot more information to you. But guys, this is how dietary recall look like in real life. This is how you will have allied health professionals in the hospital setting complete the dietary recall, and you'll have very little information to work from. And the nurse who has completed this, she may not be in the same shift as you are working, and you will just have to make do with what is given to you to the best possible capacities. Of course, sometimes you do have the option of having a chat with them or directly having a chat with the patient and asking them more information about the dietary recall. But we prepare you for the say worst come worst situation, meaning a situation where maybe the patient is not able to articulate. Maybe it's a geriatric patient and say borderline dementia, or very, very tired and just does not want to speak to anybody. And that is real life. This can happen because there are so many people coming to see the geriatric patient that the patient may be very tired and just doesn't want to talk about anything to anybody. And I have seen those sort of means cases in the hospital as well. Okay, so you may have this situation and you may not have the nurse who had done the food record chart handy, and you will just have to maximize your understanding and resources with whatever has been given to you. But of course, be mindful, guys, that in real life, you're not just restricted to the handbook and the Australian guides to healthy eating. You can use resources such as FASANS, which is again a preferable, credible resources. And sometimes for a lot of processed foods, especially in the outpatient condition, I also use Calorie King, which is quite handy. Okay, so again, coming back to your exam scenario where you just have two resources. Now you have the patient, say, food record chart telling you that they have had a ham and salad sandwich. Okay, so again, very limited information, but you know that the ham which they are talking about in this sandwich, this is, say, processed meat. Okay, because when you look at this, you are making an assumption over here that over here it is processed meat, easy to eat, simple, like in slices. So I go to my Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. Australian Guides to Healthy Eating tells me 2 slices of processed meat is, say, 50 to 60 grams. Okay, and I make this logical assumption that I just right now take this as 2 thin slices of ham. Okay, you may assume that no, Rati, I thought that the ham and salad sandwich didn't contain 2 slices, maybe it contained 1 slice, which is fine. Just tell me. Okay, tell me in the exam that you have made this assumption, and that is why your final caloric value may be a little bit lesser than what assumption I have made. Okay, but you need to tell me that assumption if you have something so ambiguous which is given to you, ham and salad sandwich. Okay, so yes, over here you have 2 thin slices of ham, all right, which is your processed meat, okay, in the sandwich. So when you look at the AGHG, as you know, the AGHG tells you that 2 slices of processed meat, which is something like ham, is 50 to 60 grams. I take off this as 2 thin slices, and I make an assumption that my 2 thin slices is roughly 50 grams. Okay, you may say go a little bit lower and saying, no, this is 1 slice and I assumed it was 40 grams, which is completely fine. Okay, it's not going to make a drastic difference. As I said, maximum 10 to 15% deviation is what I would allow for different approaches as long as they are logical. So now you have 50 grams of ham slice is 500 kilojoules. Where did I get this information from? I got this from here. Okay, so when you look at the AGHG over here, it says that a serve of discretionary choice is about 500 to 600 kilojoules. When I look at processed meat is where I'm classifying my ham. I look at 2 slices. I look at 2 thin slices. So I go for 50. So I go for the lower limit. And therefore, I take the lower limit of kilojoules over here, if that makes sense. Okay. You may say that now you have the grams, Riti, over here, 50 grams. Why don't you just use the handbook? Well, guys, in the handbook, and I may be mistaken, and please enlighten me if you can find this. I tried to find in the handbook if I have a processed meat ham as such, and the amount of grams, kilojoules, the same protocol that we have followed previously, but I could not find that anywhere. Okay. I could find information a lot on fresh meats, different type of, say maybe you have a ham cut legging, like, means ham leg and things like that, but it was not in terms of processed meat as such. There was one renal recna where you had meats which are high in sodium, just randomly, which was given to us, but again, I used my dietitian logic over here. Something that is so ambiguous for a renal ready recna, which just says high sodium meat for 40 grams has XYZ kilojoules. I said this is more ambiguous. Whereas over here, I have been advised that my 2 slices of processed meat gives you so many kilojoules. I found this resource to be much more accurate in comparison to the little ambiguous processed meat, say information that I had under the renal ready recna, which is why I chose to go with the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. So do you see, if you have 2 ambiguous resources for a particular food item, you go with the less ambiguous one. All right. So that was the logic behind it. So I had 50 grams of ham slice, and that gives me, say, roughly 500 kilojoules is where I got the information from AGHG. Okay. So over here, the tip is that I used only the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating for my processed meat. I assumed that maybe 2 slices of, say, ham are kept in this sandwich, thin slices of it. So I went with the lower limit of 50 grams. You may assume that, Rati, I just assumed a slice of it, and therefore I went with 40 grams of it or something. Okay, and that is completely fine. You may go with 35 to 40 grams, but you will let me know like this, from your background calculations. Okay, so yes, why did I go with the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating resource? Because handbook predominantly was really useful, I found, for fresh type of meats that can be classified under your core food group, under the protein-rich food group. The handbook was really good for that. There was one little thing under the renal one, but it was more ambiguous than this Australian Guides to Healthy Eating, which is why I went with the AGHG finally. Okay, so I hope, guys, that this makes sense. And these are the various approaches that I take for my calculations. But my thing over here is this is always going to change depending upon what foods you have in the 24-hour recall or in the food record chart or whatever the dietary recall method is. Okay, but what I want you to take home from this is this little handy tips that I have over here, because these are the final tips as to what you use when. This will keep changing, porridge, yogurt, custard, and whatnot. But these little tips which you have over here, please make note of these ones, because that will help you to inform your choice of logic. Okay. So yes, guys, I hope this was helpful. And for those who were still confused about energy calculations, I'll go through that again as well. And hopefully then this can help you out, guys, because as you can appreciate, this is the maximum that I can do. Even though it is a prerequisite, I would hate for you guys to lose marks, like, for these simple things. So it's good for me to take time and, record a video which you can have and you can keep reviewing later on. So I really hope this efforts that I put in are also, helpful at your end. Okay, so now, guys, when we look at energy calculation, an example that I have taken is, so you have the recommended energy intake. So ideally, this is the amount of energy the person should be having. Let's say it is 2,545 and between 2,545 and 2,600. Yes, this could be kilojoules or kilocal. That is not my point over here. My point is to show you how do you, do the calculation, irrespective of the unit, which is kilojoules or kilocals. Okay, so your what the person should be having, the recommended energy intake is in a range. Okay, so 2,545 to 2,600. What the person is actually eating. Okay, so you have done that food record chart. You have calculated the kilojoules. The amount which you computed finally was 3,900. Okay, so over here, please look at this logic. Your actual intake of energy is greater than the recommended energy intake. How do I come to that conclusion? This is the upper limit of the recommended energy intake. 2,600 is the upper limit. What is the person having? 3,900. This is more than the upper limit. Okay. So over here, all of my calculations will be with respect to the upper limit because the patient has crossed the upper limit and he's eating more amount of calories than the upper limit that is recommended, the maximum amount of calories which is recommended. Okay. So yeah, so you have 3,900, which is more than your 2,600, the upper limit for the recommended energy intake. So I will use the upper limit for my calculations. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that the maximum the patient should be having calories was 2,600, which is 100% in a day. Okay, daily caloric intake. What is he having in a day? 3,900. So again, cross multiply, marry the numbers. They are crossing the borders. So 3,900 into 100 divided by 2,600. Okay. So what does this give you? This gives you 150%. Now this is in a percent, minus this with 100. You will get your actual number. Okay. So 50. This is the little additional step that you do when you have a number which crosses 100%. Okay. So 150% minus 100% gives you 50%. So at the end, what is the take-home message? The kind of statement that you can use for PES is patient consuming 50% more energy than the estimated energy requirement. Does this make sense, guys? When your patient is eating more than the upper limit, you use the upper limit number for all of the calculation. Similarly, in the other example, if you had the recommended energy intake was same, 2,545 to 2,600. Okay, so this is the range. Now the person, what he's actually eating from that food record chart or the 24-hour recall, whatever, from that, the patient is having 1,900. So what is the lower limit over here? The minimum amount of energy that the patient should have in a day, what is recommended is 2,545. He should have at least this much amount of energy. But what is the patient having? He's having lower energy than the lower limit. Okay. So now what do? You use the lower limit for all of your calculations because the actual intake is lower than the lower limit of the recommended energy intake. Okay. So yes, your 1,900 is less than the lower limit, which is 2,545. Therefore, you will use the lower limit for your calculations. Okay. So I hope this concept is pretty simple. So you have 2,545, which I have used. Why? Because this is a minimum he should be eating, but he's eating lesser than that. So 2,545 is 100% over here. 1,900 is, say, what he's having. So now what do? You cross multiply again. Okay, you have cross multiplied divided by 2,545. What do you get? You get 74.7%. All right. So the patient is consuming 74.7%, say, of his energy intake. But over here, there is one more thing which you can do, which I should have done over here. So, which I forgot. So let me see. 74.7 minus, you have, yeah. So he is having a deficit of 25.3%. Okay. So that is something which you will write. What is his deficit? Okay. So he should be having, say, 25% more, but he's not having that. So yes, his deficit is 25% over here. All right. So yes, guys, I hope this is clear. What happens when a patient is having more amount of energy intake than the recommended versus what calculations you do when a patient is having less amount of energy intake than the recommended. Okay. So he is only meeting 74% of his energy intake over here in this example. He's not meeting 100% of it. So the other way of saying it is he is having a deficit of 25%, like two ways of writing it. You can say he's consuming 74% of his energy intake, or else you can say he's having a deficit of 25%. Either way, you're still saying the same thing. Okay, so now I'll give you one example of macronutrient calculations. It has the same logic which were there in the energy calculations. Okay, so as I said, these are the core principal calculations for you to become a dietitian. Okay, this is not just restricted to exams and things. This is something which you will be using day in and day out, irrespective of you do your private practice or a clinical, wherever you are. Okay, so now again for macronutrient, you have the same logic. So what is the logic? So for example, let's just take that the patient's estimated energy, what do you say? The estimated energy recommendation is 1900 kilocal. Okay, so ideally the patient say should be having so many kilocalories. All right, so this is what he ideally should be having according to the EER. And what is estimated carbohydrate recommendation? Well, your carbohydrate should be 45 to 65% of your estimated energy recommended. All right. So now this, guys, these numbers I haven't made up. If you go to your nutrition 101, which you did in your year 2, this is something which is taught to you that carbohydrate constitutes, say, 45 to 65% of the estimated energy recommended. Okay. So now over here, the same logic applies, which is you have 1900 is your kilocal, which is 100%. What is 45% of it? Okay. Cross multiply, you get 855 kilocal. Similarly, over here, you have 1900 into 65 over here, okay, because it's 65%. You need a range. And you do this cross multiplication, you have 1235 kilocal, okay. Now you know that with carbohydrate, I have done all of my calculations in calories. Obviously, you're free to do that in kilojoules as well. Until and unless in the exam or the assignment it is specified that you only do your calculations in kilojoules or kilocal, then you just stick to one. Otherwise, whichever one you give, it's totally fine. Okay, so now we know that 1 gram of, say, carbohydrate will give you 4 kilocal. Okay, now again, this is an established fact. Just like 45 to 65% should be constituted from carbohydrate is an established fact. These are the little things that you should remember. Similarly, this is an established fact that 1 gram of carbohydrate is 4 kilocalories. Okay, so now we are converting these kilocalories into grams. So what is 855 kilocal look in terms of grams? What does 1235 kilocalories look in terms of grams? Okay, so again, you do the same thing, which is cross multiply. And then what is the answer that you get? The answer you get is 213.75. That is, the 45% of the carbohydrate. And what does 65% of carbohydrate look as? 308.75 grams. Okay, so now I have the answers in grams, that this is the amount of carbohydrate minimum to the maximum that the person should be consuming in a day. All right, so now you have the patient's carbohydrate intake is, say, 190 grams. Okay, so you calculated the amount of carbohydrate and this is what you had. So 190 gram of carbohydrate over here, we know is less than the minimum amount of carbohydrate the patient should be consuming. The least amount of carbohydrate the patient should consume is 213.75. 190 is lesser than that. So that is why I use the lower limit for all of my calculations. So this LL over here is lower limit, UL is upper limit, things like that. Okay. So 213.75 is 100%. So what is 190? Again, cross multiply and you will get 89%. Okay, so the patient is consuming 89% of carbohydrate requirement. All right, the patient is not consuming 100% of carbohydrate requirement. Why? Because this number is less than this number. All right, so that's why the patient is meeting 89% of the carbohydrate requirement. Now, similarly, if you had a patient who's having carbohydrate intake as 400 grams, okay, now you know that the maximum amount of carbohydrate recommended for the patient to be consuming is 308.75. All right. So therefore, we use the upper limit for the calculation because what the patient is eating has crossed the upper limit. All right. So now you have 308.75 is 100%. So what is 400? All right. So now again, you cross multiply and this gives you 30%. All right. So the patient is consuming 30% more carbohydrate than the estimated carbohydrate requirement. All right. So I hope this makes some sense, guys, as to when would you use the upper limit and when would you use the lower limit, all of that. Okay. So yes, guys, I think that is all from my end. And I really hope this has been valuable for you. because these are the basic calculations that you will use day in and day out. So I hope this initiative adds meaning and makes your journey into this unit a bit more easier, okay, or at least manageable. All right. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I'll sign off now and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.